If you look at any card game other than Magic, you will find very few use lands, cards that sit in your normal deck and produce resources, without actually doing anything on their own. Initially, when you look at lands, they do seem kind of lame, right? I mean, they don't do anything. You need them to win because you need mana to cast your spells. So functionally, we have a system where you have to fill your deck with a bunch of dud cards to play the actual fun cards. When you think about lands this way, they seem archaic, unfun, and pointless, which is why new games don't use it. But in this video, I want to talk about some of the things that I think make lands really interesting. I want to argue in defense of lands. I actually like the land system and think that there's a lot of cool gameplay implications that come from it. And hopefully, you'll learn a few tips on how you can better use lands in your decks along the way. But with further ado, I want to tell you about Void Monster's newest drop. This manga-inspired drop is so sweet. This time, not only is there a special playmat, sleeves, and deck box, but there is also a sweet hoodie, which is the first time they've made a hoodie, so I'm excited to see how it turns out. Void Monster is an apparel site started by stand user Forrest ML, who also did art for Magic the Gathering. You can find him in part 9 with his stand loot. If you want to get any of these cool things I'm showing on screen, you have 1 week from when this video goes live to click the link below and order some, because after that, it's gone. Thanks to Void Monster for sponsoring the video. So what do these other games actually do instead of lands? Well, Hearthstone just gives you a mana every turn, and you're capped at 10 mana crystals. They make it so you and your opponent will always have the same amount of mana every game. You can never miss out on a mana crystal. Additionally, the person going second gets a coin to help balance out the advantage of who's going first. One Piece does something interesting where you get 2 mana every turn from your mana deck, but if you go first, you start with 1 and then get 2 every turn. Whereas if you go second, you're going to start with 2 and then get 2 more every turn. Which does lead to interesting deck building choices where you might make a deck that wants to go second so you can curve out 2 mana, 4 mana, 6 mana. Flesh and Blood functionally has all the cards act as lands and spells, where you can discard them for mana or use them as the actual spell. I guess they're more like rituals if you think about it. Digimon has a weird system where you can spend extra mana, but then your opponent will get more mana. And lastly, Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't use mana, you just kind of play cards. All of these systems have their own benefits. The main one is you never get mana flooded or screwed. In Magic, it can be frustrating when you draw no lands or too many lands and basically have a non-game. This is what those other games are trying to avoid. But even with those other mana systems, you still get lots of non-games. I have played a lot of Hearthstone and lost many games because I drew all of my high-cost cards and couldn't remove early game threats from an aggro deck. In any of the games I've listed here, you can concoct a scenario where you get stomped and basically didn't get to play the game. These are all card games. Card games inherently have an element of randomness. You can always lose in an unfortunate way. How much less fun is it if you lose because you didn't draw lands versus you lose because you didn't draw any of your early game cards? I mean, really, it's the same amount of unfun. You basically didn't get to play the game and got stomped. Getting rid of lands might lower the odds of these non-games, which is a noble goal, but you still can't eliminate the problem. Lands also change the dynamics of the actual game mechanics. If your deck has X% of dead draws due to lands, that makes card advantage all the more meaningful. There is a reason why Hearthstone starts you with 3 cards, or Yu-Gi-Oh! With 5 cards and no mulligan. If you drew 7 cards of all gas, it would be extremely powerful. Magic's opening hand and mulligan system are set up in such a way that you can find a hand consistently that has some lands and some spells. Looting and rummaging effects are also very different because of lands. You might have an extra land in hand to discard, which makes these effects much closer to drawing a card because that was a dead card anyway. And building upon that, this is why Connive is such an interesting mechanic. It takes looting and makes ditching that extra land versus an actual spell a more meaningful decision. Lands also allow for a lot of skill expression and creativity in deck building, which is lacking in those other games. How many lands you play is a decision to make. Maximizing your odds of getting enough lands is a deck building skill you can learn. You can really feel this when you play limited. Deciding between 16, 17, or 18 lands can make a big deal over the course of your limited event. There are many reasons to adjust how many lands you play. If your curve is low and tops out at 4, maybe you play less lands. If you have a lot of cheap card draw effects, you can play very few lands as well. I mean, look at any blue vintage deck. Alternatively, if you want the game to go long, you could play lots of high cost cards. Increasing your land count can then be really good, giving you the ability to consistently hit your land drops and cast those high cost spells. The number of lands in your deck also affects how well your deck can play in a top deck war. If you are looking to trade 1-for-1 or cause players to have less cards in hand because of discarding, then having less lands makes your deck, on average, better when top decking. By allowing players to choose how much mana their deck has, that player now has more control and more decisions to make. Of course, this does add some additional complexity to the game, but Magic, especially in current year, is not a game people play because it's simple. All of these games are relatively complex, Magic being the most complex because of the land system. But if I'm already going to dive into the deep end and play a very complex game, having additional control over my deck and what I play is nice. Over the years, Wizards has also made a lot of changes to help reduce the uselessness of lands. Modal dual face cards, or MDFCs, are some of the easiest examples. These are spells which can also be your lands. I think their purpose is very clear. These replace some of the lands in your deck, so when you flood out, you can still cast spells. And many of these are crazy powerful. In EDH, I will play as many of these as I can, even the MDFCs that enter tapped, just because the utility is that good. It's not just MDFC cards though. There are more utility lands than ever. The Kamigawa Neon Dynasty channel lands have incredible power. By entering untapped, there's very little downside to playing them, other than the fact they're legendary. But their ability makes them function pretty close to spells, just like the MDFCs do. In Avatar, we got a cycle of lands which functionally have spells on them, letting you loot, earthbend, and more. We also got another land cycle in Tarkir Dragonstorm that lets you make chump blockers, surveil, and again, even more. We get a lot of these lands that functionally have spells on them. When you fill your deck with these, the odds of you having literally nothing to do are pretty low. Even if it isn't very exciting, at least you can activate one of these and buy yourself a turn with a chump blocker, or set up for the next turn by scrying or looting. These can help reduce those non-games. Next, I want to talk about some synergies and gameplay that Magic offers which other games don't because of the way lands work in your deck. Let's start with some in-game mechanics. Over the years, Wizards has come up with a lot of mechanics and cards that care about lands. Landfall is probably the first thing that comes to mind. This turns your lands into spells by having effects trigger when you play them. I'll admit Landfall isn't the most exciting mechanic of all time. Giving you value for playing lands, which is already what you want to be doing, isn't super crazy, but it is still something to do with lands. We have other mechanics like Domain, which cares about land types. This allows your lands to effectively buff your spells if you play a type you haven't played before. Plus, many lands can care about other landy things, like the Tron lands, Locust lands, or Field of the Dead, which wants differently named lands. We also have lots of cards that care about the number of lands you have. One of my favorites is Ben Ben, who cares about the number of untapped mountains you have, which is also interesting because he is a commander that really cares about having more lands in play, meaning you want cards like Walking Atlas or Poo Poo UFO as ramp specifically. Cards that care about having lands of a specific type are ways to improve the power of monocolored decks. I know you have Urborg now to use as a combo piece with Cabal Coffers, but when Coffers originally got printed, it really mostly benefited mono black decks. And it still does, because having a consistent number of swamps does make Cabal Coffers quite powerful. Or the new Cabal Stronghold, which only works with basics, making it really only good in mono black. I like cards similar to Stronghold. In a game like Magic, multicolor decks generally have an advantage since they get access to more cards. So when you have things like Stronghold as a powerful option for monocolor decks, it helps balance out that power disparity. Another unique thing about Magic's mana system is the lands are things you can interact with. You can tap down someone's lands on their upkeep, make it so those lands don't untap, or just destroy them. I know some other games will let you mess with your opponent's resources, especially Digimon, but none do this as well as Magic does. The fact that you can interact with lands opens up other synergies, like playing more mana rocks, indestructible lands, and flagstones of Tarkir to help break parity with land destruction. In Magic, you can build a Jund land hate deck with Destructive Flow, Winter Moon, and Blood Moon effects. Then fill your list with basics so you are unaffected by those cards. A completely unique strategy to Magic. Yes, I do know land destruction isn't a popular mechanic among casual players, but I do think it is cool that you can even do this and just interact with lands in general. Next, I want to talk about color fixing. This is something many games have simplified away, but it is an interesting game mechanic. By having lands and colors as a choice for players, this is another knob that you can turn. If you are playing a 3-color deck, it is your choice to include cards with double or triple pips of one color. And then to compensate for that, it is again your choice to include a higher ratio of lands which can tap for that color. You have the option to splash here and there, which is another thing pretty unique to Magic. You can have your deck lean into green so you can consistently play green land ramp, which often color fixes. Speaking of color fixing, that leads me to fetch lands, duels, triomes, and all that jazz. All of these can interact with one another and other mechanics that I've listed so far. Triomes speed up that domain count. Fetch lands let you shuffle your deck and search up these duels and triomes. There's so many cool things fetch lands do. It opens up a world of synergy and deck building nuance which is absent from almost any other game. I mean, you can utilize almost every word on a fetch land in some way or another. Loading up on duels with an island type and playing fetches allows you to play multicolored high tide combos. The new Surveil lands will allow your fetches or Farseek effects to Surveil 1. A Root Path Purifier can let your Cultivate get a Field of the Dead and Vesuva. Combining other synergies together can let your deck do lots of wacky things. And then once we have this rule that you need lands for a deck to work, you can break those rules. One of my favorite decks to show new players is Manaless Dredge, which is a deck that does not produce mana, yet can win extremely fast by self-milling and casting spells via other means. Goblin Charbelcher is a fairly famous combo card. By playing little to no lands, you can use it to one-shot an opponent. Or in more recent times, playing all MDFC lands can let you technically have 0 lands in your deck and still play normally 1 land a turn. In EDH, if you want to Belcher, there are not quite enough MDFCs to fully just play them, but you can use Mana Severance if you're in blue to take all those pesky lands out. Or if you have all planes, you can use Endless Horizons to get all those pesky planes out of your deck. A benefit to this is you will draw straight gas for the rest of the game as well, if your combo gets disrupted. On the other end of the spectrum, you can play a huge amount of lands. My Mina and Den list has 49, and honestly, I want to add more, but there's so many pesky spells I'm trying to keep. Ultimately, half of this deck is cards that functionally do nothing, but the deck uses ramp and high land counts to win, with expensive, explosive spells that have big effects. And all the way on the other end of the spectrum, you can play decks that are basically all lands in an attempt to do some sort of shenanigan. Everything I have talked about in this video are effects that mostly only work when you have lands as a part of your deck, as something you can adjust, something you can interact with. All of this does include some additional level of complexity. Lands can be really frustrating for new players. If your sample size of games is low, then there is a higher chance you're going to have one of those do-nothing games due to lands. But as with all card games, Magic is a game of averages. Having the right amount of lands in your deck means on average you will have the right amount in a game. And as with any game where luck is involved, you will have to contend with the fact that luck isn't always on your side. But once you embrace that and get deeper into deck building, lands open up a massive amount of synergy and interaction that other games do not offer, making Magic's gameplay and deck building much more in depth than basically any other game out there. If you are a new player, especially a new EDH player, I implore you to take a closer look at your mana base. I know lands are not the flashy big spells that win games, but they do still lead you to winning games. If your deck is struggling, adding a bit more mana can be a huge difference, or card draw to find those lands and smooth out the early turns. Find synergies where you can to help those land drops and get mana where you need it. Additionally, play as many utility and MDFCs as you can, so drawing too many lands isn't as big of a problem. I'm sure if you look hard enough, you can find lots of synergies that will help you find a land at the right time. Maybe using the Trinket Mage to get an artifact land. Once you realize lands are a key part of your deck, your list will run much better and you will have a lot more fun. I love lands and Magic. Behind artifacts, it's probably my favorite card type. Hopefully Wizards continues in their exploration of what lands can do and find new interesting land cycles for players to tinker with. I imagine in 5 years or so, we'll have even more interesting lands to choose from and synergies to think about. Also, maybe in the future, these other games will have a bigger emphasis on their mana system. I know Riftbound does a little bit more with their mana than other games do, which I do think is interesting. I feel like Magic's depth with its land system is the most impressive and most fun and most interesting. And hopefully, with all the mechanics and synergies I have suggested and shown in this video, you agree with me on that. But if you don't, let me know in the comments below. Ash Houston asks, I miss what Magic used to be. What do you think about the idea of playing Commander over time, or a series of standard events over time where we simulate sets releasing again, like that one WoW server did with its original expansion? I just want to play from RTR to Oath of the Gatewatch. So I think this idea is very much doable. You can still buy sealed packs or sealed boxes of older sets. Lots of these aren't very popular because, they don't actually have high value cards in them. I did this recently with a Dark Ascension box, a set that came out before I started playing, and I was able to draft it with my friends as if it was, 2004 when that set came out. If you want to just play old Magic, I would recommend finding some old Magic and playing it. Finding a sealed box and playing limited is a perfect time capsule of Magic. I understand that is limited, right? Once you crack the packs, maybe, it's hard to put the toothpaste back in the tube, but it's something you can do. Additionally, you can look at formats like Pre-Modern. Pre-Modern is a format that has a set number of cards in it. It doesn't change ever, and you can just grind that forever. And that format is picking up a lot of steam. So those are some things I would recommend to you. I think otherwise, if you just want to play what Magic used to be like, Bracket 2 Commander will get you there. You can play some real old classic jank. Thanks for watching. If you want to answer questions like that or be in the credits here or just support me in general, click the link below to check out my Patreon. Special thanks to my tier 3 patrons whose names are here.